This testimony is one of those rare stories that stirs the soul, a moment that challenges what we thought we knew and opens our eyes to the transforming power of Jesus. As you watch, take a moment to let each scene sink in. Feel the weight of the story, the breakthrough, and the undeniable grace that changes everything. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and share how this journey speaks to your heart. Your thoughts, reactions, and reflections help spark the kind of conversations that inspire faith, healing, and deeper understanding. I grew up in a palace that looked like gold when the sun rose, but to me, it often felt cold. My parents worked as royal servants, and from the time I could walk, I learned how to bow, how to serve, and how to keep secrets. The king's palace was filled with rules about how to speak, what to wear, and even what to think. We were told to fear the gods carved into stone, to light lamps before them, and to whisper prayers that never seemed to reach beyond the ceiling. But deep inside, I felt empty. I would watch the royal priests burn incense and chant, yet my heart stayed still. Sometimes at night, when everyone slept, I climbed the narrow stairs to the servants' quarters and looked out over the city lights. I often wondered if there was someone greater who truly listened, someone who knew my name. One day, as I cleaned the study of the old royal librarian, I found a small folded paper hidden between two dusty books. The words on it were strange but warm. I couldn't read all of them, but one sentence stood out. Asterisk, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Something stirred inside me. That night, I lit my small candle, placed the secret page under its glow, and read each line slowly. I didn't know much about this Jesus, but every word felt alive, as if someone unseen was whispering to my heart. From that night onward, I read the hidden page every evening in secret. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not even my friend Layla. I felt something changing inside me, a peace I had never known before, like the warmth of morning sunlight after a long storm. But I didn't know then that my quiet candlelight would soon become the center of a fire that would shake the entire palace. It was late that evening when the air in the palace turned strangely heavy. I had just finished my chores and hurried back to the servants' quarters, clutching the tiny page of the Bible against my chest. The candle beside my bed flickered weakly as I opened the paper to read once more. My heart rested on the words about faith and light. I whispered quietly, asking this Jesus I had read about to make me brave, to help me know him more. But suddenly I heard shouting. At first, I thought it was the guards changing posts, but then came the sound of running feet and the sharp cry of fear. I rushed to the small window. A cloud of smoke was rising from the far side of the palace. Flames were licking up the outer walls, bright, wild, and alive. Within moments, panic filled the halls. Servants screamed, soldiers shouted orders, and the smell of burning wood and cloth filled the air. The king's banners, woven with gold threads, began to curl and blacken. Everyone ran toward the main gates, pushing, crying, trying to escape. But I couldn't move. My feet froze as I saw where the fire was heading, the throne room. The grand hall where the king's chair stood, covered in gold and gems, was now in danger. If it burned, the entire palace would collapse. Something deep inside me began to stir. I remembered the words I had read just hours ago about light overcoming darkness. I felt tears fill my eyes. I didn't know what else to do, so I fell to my knees beside my candle. My voice trembled as I prayed, not in the way the royal priests did, but from my heart. I asked Jesus, the one I had read about, to stop the fire, to show that he was real. The flames grew louder, roaring like a beast. The heat pressed against my skin, and the smell of smoke filled the air. Yet as I prayed, something strange began to happen. The air around me became still. The roar softened, the crackling slowed, and the smoke began to thin. When I finally lifted my head, I saw something no one could explain. The fire had stopped right at the entrance of the throne room, as if an invisible wall stood between the flames and the golden door. I felt a trembling in my heart. I knew I had not done this. I knew Jesus had. Moments later, the guards burst in, covered in sweat and ash. When they saw the fire stopped before the throne, they stared at me with wide eyes. Someone shouted to fetch the king. And I realized then, My secret was no longer mine. They led me through the smoky corridors, my bare feet slipping on the marble floors. The palace still smelled of ash, though the fire was gone. Guards surrounded me, some whispering, others staring as if I were something strange, something dangerous. My candle and the burned Bible page were still in my trembling hands. When we reached the throne room, I felt my knees weaken. The king sat there, his royal robe stained with soot, his crown tilted on his head. The golden pillars behind him were darkened by smoke, and the floor was wet from buckets of water. He looked tired, but his eyes were fierce. He motioned for everyone to leave. The room fell silent. Only the sound of dripping water echoed through the air. "Child," he said finally, his voice low, "they say the fire stopped because of you. Tell me the truth. What did you do?" My heart raced. I wanted to hide. But something in me refused to stay silent. I took a deep breath and said, "It wasn't me, my king. I prayed to Jesus." The name seemed to echo through the hall like thunder. The king's face hardened. "Jesus?" he repeated slowly, as though tasting the word for the first time. "Who is this Jesus?" I didn't know what to say. I was only 11. All I had were the few words I had read from that page, the ones that spoke of his light and power. So I told the king what I understood, that Jesus was alive, that he hears prayers, that he saved me and stopped the fire when I called his name. The king stared at me for a long time, silent. I thought he would have me punished, maybe even thrown into prison. But instead, he looked past me, toward the door where the fire had stopped. He rose from his throne and walked slowly toward it, his hand brushing the charred walls. The flames had stopped at the edge of the marble steps, leaving a perfect line between blackened ruin and untouched beauty. No ordinary fire would have stopped so sharply. When he turned back to me, there was fear in his eyes, but also wonder. "Leave her," he told the guards. "Bring the royal scholars. Bring the priests. I want this child watched, but not harmed." As they led me out, I felt a strange peace in my chest. I didn't understand everything that was happening, but I knew one thing. Jesus had heard me. And somehow, the king himself was beginning to see the truth. That night, I knelt again in my small room, the candle burning low. I whispered my thanks, not just for saving me, but for touching the heart of a man who ruled nations. And though I couldn't see him, I felt that same warmth again, as if someone unseen was smiling upon me in the quiet dark. The next morning, the palace felt different. Servants whispered as I passed, their eyes filled with both fear and curiosity. Some avoided me altogether, as if I carried something dangerous. Others followed me silently from a distance, as though trying to see if I glowed with some unseen power. By midday, the king sent for me again. This time, the great hall was filled with the kingdom's wisest men, priests, scholars, and royal advisors. Long tables were covered with scrolls, symbols, and sacred books. The air smelled of incense and tension. The king sat at the far end of the hall. "Huda," he said calmly, "these men will test what you claim. You said your Jesus stopped the fire. If he is real, his truth will stand." I nodded, my heart pounding. I didn't have fancy words or knowledge like the scholars. I was only a servant girl. But I knew what I had seen. The priests began to chant in their language, asking their gods for signs. Hours passed, but nothing happened. The air remained still. Then the king turned to me. "Pray," he commanded. My hands trembled as I held the burnt edge of the Bible page. I whispered a prayer in my heart, not loud, not showy. I simply asked Jesus to reveal his truth, not for me, but so these people would believe. As I prayed, a sudden breeze moved through the room, though no window was open. The candles flickered but did not go out. The heavy air lightened, and the strange scent of smoke faded away completely. The scholars looked around, murmuring among themselves. One of them, an old man with a long white beard, lifted his trembling hand. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I saw the fire stop last night. I saw this child kneel. The wind that came today, it is the same. There is power in that name she speaks." The king said nothing for a long time. His eyes moved from the old man to me. "Power," he said finally, "but from where?" He ordered his guards to bring every scroll, every writing that mentioned this Jesus. 4 days the scholars searched, comparing words, reading, questioning. I was kept in a guarded chamber, but the guards were kind to me. One even whispered that his sister's fever had left after he prayed the way I did. At night, when I was alone, I prayed again. Not for myself, but for the king, for the palace, for the city. I asked that their hearts be opened. Sometimes, as I prayed, I felt peace wash over me so deeply that I cried quietly into my hands. On the 7th day, the king called me again. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "The scrolls speak of this Jesus," he said. "They say he healed, he spoke of love, he rose from death." He looked down at me, his eyes unsure. If this is true, what does it mean for us? I didn't have all the answers. I only knew what he had done for me. So I told the king what I understood, that Jesus is alive, that he saves anyone who calls his name, even a small servant girl like me. The hall went silent again. But this time I could see it, the beginning of belief in their eyes. That night, after the long questioning, they let me rest in a quiet room near the inner garden. I could still hear the soft crackle of guards' torches outside, and the cool night air carried the scent of jasmine and ashes. My mind was full, so many questions, so many faces, and yet one name kept echoing inside me, Jesus. I knelt beside my small bed, holding the candle close to my heart. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a deep longing I could not explain. I whispered softly, thanking him for being near, for hearing me when no one else could. I told him I was just a child and that I didn't know how to speak to kings or scholars. As I prayed, the candle's flame grew still. The room seemed to grow brighter, though no wind blew, and I felt warmth surround me, soft, peaceful, alive. My eyes filled with tears. I didn't see anyone, but I felt him there. He let me know I was not alone. He made me understand that the fire that night was not just to save the palace. It was to show his power to those who had never known his name. He let me feel that there would be more to come, that others would believe, and that even if I faced trouble, he would never leave me. I stayed there for a long time, my hands folded, my heart resting in that quiet presence. It was not a dream, it was more real than anything I could touch. I felt courage rise within me like a river breaking through dry ground. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. Servants who once avoided me began to ask questions. Some came secretly at night, whispering, "Tell us about this Jesus." I told them what I knew, that he listens, that he forgives, and that his light shines even in darkness. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd be truly honored to have you join this growing family of faith and reflection. Every new heart adds something beautiful to our community. This testimony is one of those rare stories that stirs the soul, a moment that challenges what we thought we knew and opens our eyes to the transforming power of Jesus. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and share how this journey speaks to your heart. Your thoughts, reactions, and reflections help spark the kind of conversations that inspire faith, healing, and deeper understanding. The king grew quieter too. Often, he would stand near the place where the fire had stopped, looking thoughtful. One evening, he called me again, not to question, but to listen. He wanted to hear every word of what I had read on that old page. I recited what I could remember, and he stood silently, hands behind his back, the golden light of the setting sun falling across his face. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I felt something gentle in his tone when he finally spoke. "There is truth here," he said slowly, "and peace." That night, as I returned to my room, I looked at the candle by my bed. Its light danced softly, reflecting in my eyes. I smiled, knowing the same light was beginning to glow in the hearts of others too. The next morning, the palace woke later than usual. The servants whispered that the king had not slept, that he had seen something strange in the night. By noon, a guard came for me. His eyes looked nervous as he said, "The king has called for you again, Huda." When I entered the throne room, it was quieter than I had ever seen it. The golden curtains were half drawn, and sunlight poured through in long, bright stripes. The king sat alone, no crown on his head this time, just a simple robe. His face looked different, tired, but softer somehow. He motioned for me to come closer. "Child," he began slowly, "something happened to me last night. I saw a light in my dream, brighter than fire, brighter than gold. It filled the throne room, yet it did not burn. In that light I heard a voice. It didn't speak like a man, yet I understood every word." He paused, his hand trembling slightly. "It let me know that there is one true king greater than I, one whose throne no fire can destroy. It showed me that my power, my gold, my temples, they mean nothing without truth." I stood there quietly, my heart racing. I didn't know what to say. The king looked at me again, his eyes wet. "You're Jesus," he said. "He is real, isn't he?" I nodded. "Yes, my king. He is alive." The king leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. "Then what am I to do?" he murmured. I didn't have wise words, but in my heart I felt him guiding me. I told the king that Jesus doesn't ask for gold or power. He asks for hearts that believe. He wants people to love one another, to forgive, to walk in truth. The king was silent for a long while. Finally he said, "If this is true, then the people must know. But how can I tell them without angering the priests? They fear losing their power." I said nothing. I only prayed silently, asking Jesus to lead him. Then something gentle seemed to fill the room again, the same peace I had felt during my prayer that night. The king seemed to sense it too. He whispered, "I will not hide what I have seen." That day, messengers were sent quietly across the palace. The scholars were summoned again, not to argue, but to read the writings about Jesus aloud. Some mocked, some questioned, but a few listened. And as the sun set, the king walked out to the balcony overlooking the city. I stood behind him, watching the golden rooftops glow in the fading light. He didn't speak for a long time, but when he finally did, his voice was soft. "If what you believe is true, Huda," he said, "then maybe even kings need saving." Those words stayed in my heart, because I knew something had begun. The days that followed felt like a quiet sunrise after a long night. The palace, once filled with empty rituals and proud voices, began to change in small but deep ways. Servants who used to bow before stone idols now whispered prayers of hope when no one was watching. The guards who once laughed at me began to ask if Jesus could forgive even them. The king, though cautious, ordered that no one be punished for speaking the name of Jesus. That single command brought peace to hearts that had lived in fear for years. I continued my chores each morning, sweeping, carrying water, helping in the kitchen, but everywhere I went, people wanted to hear the story. They called it, "The Night the Fire Bowed." Some came only out of curiosity, others because they felt something stirring inside. I told them the truth, that I had no power, that it was Jesus who saved us all that night. One afternoon, as I was helping in the royal garden, a group of children approached me. They were the children of palace workers, their faces curious and bright. "Is it true, Huda?" one asked. "Did your prayer stop the fire?" I smiled and shook my head. "No. My prayer didn't stop it. Jesus did." Their eyes widened. One little girl whispered, "Can he hear us too?" I nodded. "Yes. He hears everyone who calls his name from their heart." They looked at one another, then knelt right there among the flowers, whispering small, simple prayers. I felt tears fill my eyes. The same light that once burned in my tiny candle was now spreading like dawn across the palace. Even some of the royal advisors began to soften. I once saw the old scholar, the same man who had doubted me, standing silently in the throne room, his head bowed in thought. Later, he came to me and said quietly, "I read more about your Jesus. There is a peace in his words that I cannot deny." At night, I continued to read the same worn page, though by now I knew most of it by heart. My candlelight still flickered against the walls, just as it did on the night of the fire. But now I wasn't afraid. The flame reminded me that light can live even in the darkest places. The king also began to visit the people more often. He spoke less about power and more about kindness. Once, I heard him tell a guard, "A kingdom built on fear will fall, but one built on truth will stand." I smiled quietly to myself. That sounded like something Jesus would have let him understand. The palace was no longer the same. And though not everyone believed yet, I could see hearts awakening, slowly, gently, like candles catching one another's flames in the dark. Not long after peace began to grow in the palace, trouble also began to rise outside its gates. The high priests of the old temple heard about what had happened, the fire, the king's dream, and the whispers of Jesus spreading through the servants. They were angry. Their power depended on fear, and fear was slipping away. One morning, as I was sweeping the marble steps, a group of guards rushed in. Their captain looked troubled. "Huda," he said, "the priests demand that the king hand you over to them. They say your prayers bring rebellion against the old gods." For the first time since the fire, I felt my heart tremble. I didn't want to be taken away. I was only a servant girl. But deep inside, something reminded me, Jesus had not saved me to leave me now. The king called for me later that day. His face was dark with worry. "They threaten war," he said. "They say if I do not give you to them, the temples will rise against the throne. They want to silence you." I lowered my head. "Then let them take me," I said softly. "If that is what must happen, I am not afraid." But the king shook his head. "No, child. You have brought light here. I will not hand you to darkness." 4 days, the palace gates were surrounded by angry voices. People shouted that the king had abandoned the old ways. Some threw stones at the walls. Fear crept through the halls once again. That night I could not sleep. I knelt by my candle and prayed. My heart was heavy, but as I prayed, the same peace came again. He let me know that the truth never dies, even when people try to silence it. He made me understand that light grows stronger when it is tested. The next morning, I woke with courage. I went to the balcony where the king stood watching the crowds. The sun had just risen, painting the sky gold and pink. I stood beside him and said, "Do not be afraid, my king. Jesus is with us. Let truth stand and he will defend it." The king looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. He ordered that the palace gates be opened. He walked out before the people himself and spoke with a voice that carried through the square. "This child did not bring harm to us. She brought light. The fire that night was not her doing. It was a sign of mercy. If your gods have power, let them show it. But as for me, I will not deny what my eyes have seen." The crowd grew silent. No storm came. No fire fell. Only a strange stillness filled the air. Some began to whisper. Others lowered their banners. I knew then that God was fighting for us, not with swords or fear, but with truth. That evening, as the sun set, the crowd slowly disappeared. The palace stood unharmed, and the king's voice spread across the city like a new song of freedom. Still, I understood something deeper that night. Following Jesus does not mean a life without trials, but it means never walking alone through them. Weeks passed, and peace began to settle again over the palace and the city. What once felt like a heavy place of fear and pride slowly became a place of hope. The story of the night the fire stopped had spread far beyond the palace walls. Travelers spoke of it in the marketplaces, families whispered it around their evening fires. They called it the miracle of the throne room. More and more people began to ask questions about Jesus. Some came to the palace gates, begging to hear the words that I had read. But I had only one page of the Bible, burnt and torn. I knew I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. One morning, I asked the king for permission to speak to the people. He agreed, though with concern in his eyes. "They will listen," he said, "but some may still hate what they do not understand." So, with trembling hands, I stood before the crowd in the great square. My small voice barely carried at first, but the people grew silent. I told them everything. How I had found the page, how I had read it by candlelight, how Jesus heard my prayer and stopped the fire. I told them that he was not a distant God of stone or gold, but a living Savior who sees and loves everyone, the rich and poor, the servant and the king. As I spoke, I saw faces soften. Some wept quietly. Mothers held their children closer. Even the soldiers stood still, their spears lowered. I felt warmth in the air again, the same presence that had been with me in the fire. It was as if the whole city could feel it too. After that day, something beautiful began to happen. The king ordered that a small hall beside the palace be opened for anyone who wanted to learn more about Jesus. The royal scholars who once tested me now read the scriptures aloud to others. Servants who once hid their prayers now prayed openly. At night, from the palace window, I could see candles glowing across the city. One here, two there, then hundreds. Families were praying, singing softly, whispering thanks to the one they had come to know. The city that once bowed before idols now glowed with light, not from gold or fire, but from hearts awakened by truth. Sometimes, I still sat in my small room with the same candle by my side. I looked at the old Bible page, its edges brown and torn, but its words still clear. I no longer felt alone when I read them. I knew that the same Jesus who had been with me that night was now with every person who called his name in faith. The king would often say to me, "The fire that once threatened to destroy us has become the fire that gives us light." And he was right. Now, as I look back on everything that happened, the fire, the fear, the king's dream, and the light that filled our city, I understand something deeper than I ever did before. Jesus did not choose me because I was strong, wise, or worthy. He chose me because I was willing to believe, even when I was afraid. Every time I lit my candle in the darkness, he was teaching me that faith is like that small flame. It may seem weak, surrounded by shadows, but it carries the power to drive the darkness away.